Good day, everyone. My name is Rich Chester. I'm the Director of Consulting for LPA Software Solutions, and I'm also the head of our business intelligence practice. It's my pleasure today to be with you to present the information around the Query Studio and Analysis Studio end-of-life announcement that was made on October 7th of 2014. Talk to you about what that end-of-life announcement contained, because it actually was more than just Query and Analysis Studio. We'll talk about guidance in terms of moving forward without Query and Analysis Studio, and whether or not you should move now or whether you should wait. We'll talk to you about replacing Query and Analysis Studio with the Cognos Workspace Advanced tool in terms of both what you have available to you today and what is potentially coming in a future release. We'll talk about a new feature that was released with 10.2.2 specifically to Cognos Workspace Advanced, and it's this notion of custom interface profiles. We'll do a demonstration of a number of the items that I'll bring up today in terms of conversion options as well as these profiles. And then at the end, we'll take your questions and provide as many answers as time permits. So please submit your questions via the text feature, the chat feature of the WebEx. You can submit them throughout the webinar. I will get to as many as I can at the end. Any that we don't get to while we're on the air, because of time, we will absolutely follow up with you via email with the answer to your questions after the webinar. So I'm looking forward to those. So let's jump in. Query and Analysis Studio end of life was announced in the 10.2.2 release letter for the BI release on October 7th of 2014. Now that release letter, which you can Google, if you Google IBM United States Software Announcement 214-422, you will find this announcement and all of the details that are there. And I do recommend that you look at that, and that in general that you look at all of the release letters that come with the different releases of Cognos BI, because there's an awful lot of information in there. I'm going to include a little bit here on the slide of what was in that letter. The letter contains what is new in 10.2.2, what is no longer available in 10.2.2, and those things for which 10.2.2 is the last release. And I'm going to focus on that last one here. So 10.2.2 is the last release to include, among other things, this is not an exhaustive list from that letter, by the way, you should get the letter. But among other things, Query Studio and Analysis Studio. This is the very last release in which you could launch those studios to edit Query Studio and Analysis Studio reports. Now, we'll get in a minute to what happens to those reports after you upgrade. OLAP data sources that are things along the lines of dynamic cubes, TM1, SQL Server Analysis Services, Essbase, SAP BW, and any other cube technology that you know Cognos supports. 10.2.2 is the last release where you'll be able to access those cube technologies with compatible query mode. That's the 32-bit query mode. From now on, subsequent releases after 10.2.2, you'll have to use dynamic query mode to access those OLAP data sources, those cube data sources. The one exception to this is IBM Power Cubes, the cubes that you create using the Transformer product. That's a 32-bit product. It will require compatible query mode to access those, but all other OLAP technologies after this release will require dynamic query mode. The release letter says this is the last release that will include 32-bit platforms. To my knowledge, the only 32-bit server platform that remains is the Windows 32-bit platform. So I believe that means that the Windows 32 is no longer available after 10.2.2. Cognos Real-Time Monitoring product, this is the last release that will include it, and Alan Delphonse, this is the last release, 10.2.2, that will include those. So in addition to things in the letter that are no longer part of Cognos BI, or for which this is the last release that they'll be supported, in the letter it also talks about external things that will not be supported after the 10.2.2 release. For example, running Cognos on Windows Vista will no longer be supported after this release. A number of content store databases will no longer be supported. And as you can see there, a couple of versions of DB2 and Informix, all versions of Sybase, and SQL Server 2005 and Derby. Now, SQL Server 2005, I'm aware of a number of our clients that are still running their content store on SQL Server 2005. So that's an important one to take note of as well. Internet Explorer 8 and 9, this is the last release to support those versions of Internet Explorer. I have heard, although future releases of Cognos are subject to change, I have heard that in the next release, Internet Explorer 10 and 11 will be supported in native mode, and you won't have to set your browser up for compatibility mode. But that's a rumor, not a fact. That's not in this letter, for example. That's just something I've heard. Excel versions 2002, 2003, and XP. This is the last release supporting those. And there's a whole bunch of others. So I really do recommend that you search for this software announcement letter that goes with 10.2.2 so that you can look through and make sure that you understand whether or not you're using items that are not going to be supported in subsequent releases of Cognos BI. So what exactly is this end-of-life announcement mean then? Well, it does mean indeed that the studios themselves will not be available after release 10.2.2. Now, do keep in mind, though, that release 10.2.2 is currently supported release. It's the currently genuinely available release. There's FixPack 2 out, in case you were curious how many FixPacks have come out. And IBM states that this release that includes Query and Analysis Studio as full-blown studios will be supported until at least October 2018. So one of your options is to wait and only migrate when the 10.2.2 release is not supported. My suspicion is that the couple of releases that will happen between now and October of 2018 could contain some pretty compelling things that would make you want to upgrade. So part of my conversation here is going to be about moving forward without Query and Analysis Studio so that you don't have to wait until October 2018. But for some folks, that may very well be an option versus moving quickly off of Query or Analysis Studio. IBM states in the frequently asked questions about this end-of-life announcement that all of the Query and Analysis Studio assets that you've created will be protected. So what that means is, based on my understanding of the FAQ, is that those reports will still be runnable. You'll be able to run them in a Cognos viewer. So you can run them, you can schedule them, you can distribute them just like you can today. And you can use the contents of them in a Cognos Workspace, but you won't be able to edit them. In other words, you won't be able to launch a studio when you click on it today, right? When you click on a Query Studio report to run it today, it opens it in Query Studio. Similarly with Analysis Studio. Subsequent release, when you click on it, it will run it in a viewer. And you could also leverage it in Workspace, but you won't be able to edit it via those studios after this release. So what is going to replace Query and Analysis Studio? Well, that's what Cognos Workspace Advanced is for. So Cognos Workspace Advanced is a tool that is similar to Query and Analysis Studio in that as you build your reports, you have the option to see your data. They are a drag it and drop it interface with what's called preview mode on or available to you. That's the see my data as you go. Query Studio and Analysis Studio were a bit more basic than Cognos Workspace Advanced. So CWA can do more things, but let's keep in mind also that CWA cannot do everything that Query and Analysis Studio do today. And that's why the bottom slide here, or the bottom of the slide says, is CWA really ready to replace them today? It actually takes a little bit of discussion. So let me show you what I mean. So Cognos Workspace Advanced is a tool in 10.2.2 that is actually capable of editing Report Studio reports, and Report Studio is capable of editing Cognos Workspace Advanced reports. So they are sort of interchangeable tools on the same report. Not so much with Query and Analysis Studio today. If I convert a query or an analysis to Report Studio, from then on, I need to edit it in Report Studio. With CWA and Report Studio, I do not have this conversion notion because they're both actually operating on the same report. Neither directly operate on Query and Analysis Studio reports. Now, if I were to try to do everything I could do in Query and Analysis Studio in CWA, I would find there are a number of things I cannot do in that tool. Now, for the most part with Query Studio, CWA does pretty much everything. There is one big thing, though, that most of my Query Studio users really like that Cognos Workspace Advanced doesn't do, and that is when you add a filter or a sort to a CWA report, there is no automatic display of text at the top of the report that tells you what the filters are or what the sorts are. So in Query Studio, when you add a filter, when you add a sort, it auto-labels your report. That functionality is not in Cognos Workspace Advanced. And while there are some other small things that are not in CWA right now, that's probably the biggest one from a Query Studio perspective. It turns out there are bigger gaps in functionality between Analysis Studio and CWA. One of them is this notion of train of thought set replacement, which I'll demonstrate for you. So you'll see what that means in Analysis Studio. That is definitely not part of CWA yet, and there are others as well. Now, IBM says that all of these differences are going to be bridged in a future release. Now, and that's the word used in the guidance, is in a future release, which is not to say that they'll be replaced in the next release. Now, one would hope that a lot of them would be, right? That they wouldn't retire the studios without having plans that would cover most of the gaps. But the guidance that is out there specifically says a future release. It does not say the next release. Now, there is other guidance out there, and there is a Query Studio Analysis Studio retirement FAQ that I mentioned. If you Google it, you'll see there's a number of questions and answers out there. And one of the things that they tell you is that there is no urgency to migrate users to Cognos Workspace Advanced right now. That's IBM's guidance. Now, our guidance from LPA is this. If you're launching a new report project today, and normally you would have your ad hoc users leveraging Query or Analysis Studio, our advice is that you begin to wean your users onto CWA and that you give a lot of thought to rolling out CWA for those new projects now rather than continuing to roll Query and Analysis Studio. Okay, so, but why now? I mean, why would we have that guidance? Well, basically, Query Studio and Analysis Studio are dead ends. If you're going to be rolling those tools to a user community that doesn't already know them, you're going to be investing in training. You're going to be investing time and money in teaching them a tool that you know is an end-of-life tool. Now, again, unless you're going to stick with the I'll use 10.2.2 until it is no longer supported notion, which again is sometime in 2018 at a minimum per IBM, you really don't want to be teaching people a dead tool, is our stance. Now, there's even conjecture, and this is totally conjecture, but I've heard it a couple of times, so I figure it's worth repeating. But again, it's not official guidance. There's conjecture that Report Studio will ultimately be replaced by Cognos Workspace Advanced, and there will actually be one report authoring tool in Cognos, down from a total of 4 that are part of 10.2.2. So our guidance is new projects should not employ known dead ends, especially if you're going to be doing education for your users. So our guidance is for new projects, plan to use Cognos Workspace Advanced from the outset. Now, if you move appropriate reports in a measured way now, you're going to avoid a mad rush when it's time to upgrade. You want to upgrade, you want to get access to those new features, but you've got hundreds of reports that you have to convert so you can continue to edit them. So we have seen some demos of the next Cognos BI release. They seem very exciting. Of course, everything that we saw could be pulled from the release, We're not IBM. We can't make any promises about the contents of a future release, and neither can IBM for that matter. I think we've all heard the forward-looking statements, disclaimers at the end of any demos we might have been lucky enough to have of future functionality. However, if some even of the functionality that I have seen in some demos stays in the release, it's going to be a very exciting release, and there's a number of compelling enhancements that could be there. And what we don't want is a mad rush to try to move all of our existing query and analysis studio reports in time to leverage the latest release. So begin to move reports now, and let's call it a measured way. Use auditing to determine what reports are being used. Often we have a library of reports, only few of which actually get used on a routine basis. Those you might move. Now, if you are going to convert a report, and again, you don't have to in order to preserve the ability to run it, but if you are routinely editing a query or analysis studio report, then you are going to want to convert it before you lose access to the studio in some way. Now, converting using the open in report studio functionality that is in Query and Analysis Studio is not the proper way to convert it, unfortunately. And I will demonstrate this today as to the kinds of things you'll see when you do that conversion. You really are going to need to rewrite the reports that you routinely modify using native Cognos Workspace Advanced functionality. Now, if you don't routinely modify a report, if it's perfect, you run it and it just works, then those will come along for the ride into the next release. They'll be runnable, they'll be usable. There's no reason to touch them at all. However, if you modify reports on a routine basis with Analysis and Query Studio, you're going to need to preserve the ability to modify those reports, and so you're going to want to convert them to Cognos Workspace Advanced or to Report Studio reports, CWA being the tool that would be for end users. The modified reports, the converted reports using Open in Report Studio functionality, as you'll see, result in some very complex reports, overly complex, actually not maintainable, some might say. So I'll display that, and which will give you the reason for why we suggest that you actually rewrite the reports in CWA or Report Studio rather than convert them. But we'll show you that in a moment. Now, the CWA interface is not identical to the QS or AS interface. It is a different interface. Indeed, if you run it natively, you'll see that the drag and drop is from right to left. Now you can switch that with tools options. You can switch it so that you are dragging from left to right again. But even right out of the box, you'll see that the orientation of the tool is a bit different. Also, there's a property sheet at the bottom of the insertable objects pane. There's a toolbox and source notion there. There is still, though, the familiar drag it, drop it, see my data interface. But IBM has actually worked very hard to create a single user experience for creation of queries and analyses. Indeed, that's why they created Cognos Workspace Advanced, was to give users one experience, one way, one tool to create both queries and analyses. This end of life is simply the end of a plan to retire these products in favor of CWA. That's why CWA exists. But IBM also realizes that a one studio fits all approach is going to be a source of frustration. So with the 10.2.2 release, they introduced a way for you to create a custom reporting interface that when you launch Cognos Workspace Advanced, you can assign one or more interfaces to your user communities that are either simpler than the standard interface or more feature-rich than the standard interface of Cognos Workspace Advanced, with certain defaults turned on or off. And that's this notion of a custom Cognos Workspace Advanced profile. So again, facilitating your migration in a measured way now to CWA is the notion that you can enhance the Cognos Workspace Advanced user interface. You can add a few new features to the interface. Think about what you want from Report Studio to add to CWA. That's sort of the concept. Or you can take some away if you find that CWA is too complex for some of your users. So you create a collection of profiles. This is a one-time thing. Once you have done it, you cannot undo it. And I'll show you how to do it on my environment today in the demo. But once you've done it, you can then copy either the Report Studio or the CWA interface and then modify the contents of the studios. You then assign users, or you assign groups of users or roles of users. That's probably more common. It's going to be groups and roles rather than individual users to these interfaces. If a user only has access to one interface, when they launch CWA, they get that interface and there's no prompting. If a user has access to multiple interfaces, which you'll see today during the demo, I will have access to all of the interfaces. You'll see there's a prompt, and then you can select an interface. You can also set an interface in that situation where one is the default interface for you. So I've talked enough about all the things I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate them. So I have remoted into a desktop here, and I'm logged into Cognos 10.2.2. And the first thing I'm going to show you is a couple of reports that I have out here. I'll start with a Query Studio report. So this Query Studio report, pretty simple. I created a combined filter. So this is a filter that's been grouped. And I did that on purpose, even though this filter didn't need to be grouped to work. I want to show you what happens to grouped filters when you convert to Cognos Workspace Advanced or Report Studio. Some grouped items. This income is a calculation that is just quantity times unit sale price. And I want to show you what happens to that simple calculation when you convert. So straightforward grouped list report. If I were to sort it, you would see that I get an automatic sort line at the top. But if I go to Manage File here and convert it to a Report Studio report, and I'm going to actually go ahead and do that, but I'm going to save it and then open it in Cognos Workspace Advanced. I'm not going to examine it in Report Studio. So this is going to be my CWA version of QS report, stored in the same place. Now, you recall earlier I said that when you convert to Report Studio and save the report, you can also edit it in Cognos Workspace Advanced. So this is the report that I created. I have the option to open it in Report Studio. I have the option to open it in Cognos Workspace Advanced. So I'm going to open it by clicking on the compass and open it in Cognos Workspace Advanced. Now I have done nothing with custom profiles or anything in this environment. This is a fresh install of CWA. So you see that overcame the text, but it is indeed just text. This is not going to be active. If I were to change my sort order and add a different sort, nothing changes up here. You see, so that is missing functionality, this auto labeling of sorts and filters. And in Query Studio, you would edit, you double click the image of the filter to edit. Now you don't do that in CWA. So you see it is a different interface. There is an education component to this migration for sure. If I click on Edit Filters, there's my grouped filter, but you see this converted report, grouped filters can't be edited. So again, converting from Query Studio to Report Studio and then editing it in CWA is not the way to go. You will find that there are things you cannot edit, for example that. If we edit the expression for my income, when I did this in Query Studio, I did quantity times unit sale price, but look what it's become. It's become total times average. And while that is accurate and true, this is not the kind of formula that is going to necessarily be straightforward for your users to maintain. Had you written this report natively in Cognos Workspace Advanced, let's say rewritten it as part of your migration plan, then this would simply have said quantity times unit sale price. It wouldn't have all of the aggregate functions listed in there. Okay, so converting a Query Studio report to CWA via the conversion to Report Studio that's baked into the tool now is not something that LPA recommends. We recommend that you rewrite natively. It will be more maintainable, it will be more native, and it will be ultimately the better choice for you. So that's an example of a Query Studio report. So I won't save that. Let me open up an Analysis Studio report. So this is an Analysis Studio. Here I've got some context filters of Americas in 2011, and I've got order methods across the top, and I've got some aggregates up and down the crosstab. If I were to do the same thing and open this with Report Studio, I can indeed convert it, and it would be editable, but as you'll see in a moment, not particularly editable in the end. So let me save it. And again, I'm just going to do on my CWA version on report, and then I will open it in Cognos Workspace Advanced. So there it is. Click the compass to edit it in CWA. Now, each of the items you add to an Analysis Studio report becomes a custom set. And normally, you can edit a set in CWA by selecting it and right-clicking on it, and there'll be an Edit Set option here. Unfortunately, when you convert from Analysis Studio, that option is not available. This margin percent function that I did as a percent calculation is not editable. These guys are, again, just text, and they do, and an image of the filter, and they do not auto-update within this tool. Also, there's a slicer that's available, and if I go back to my original report and just show you that, because I did not point it out when it was open. You see I have a context filter where this report is filtered by Americas in 2011, and unfortunately that context filter is simply not available to me to edit because it didn't change it to a context filter. It changed it to an advanced slicer, which is only editable in Report Studio. So converting an Analysis Studio report to Report Studio and then trying to maintain it with the replacement tool, CWA, not going to work out in general. So LPA's guidance is don't do what I just showed you, which is to update, to convert your your Query Studio, pardon me, convert your Query Studio or Analysis Studio reports to Report Studio via that functionality within those tools, save them, and then try to maintain them in either CWA or Report Studio. You're not going to be happy. Instead, if you write these reports natively, they're going to be far more editable. So again, if the report today, the Query Studio or Analysis Studio report today works fine, you never edit it, you just run it, and as is, you need to do nothing. It will come along in the next release and will be runnable. If, on the other hand, you routinely update, either changing filter contents or maybe adding new columns or calculations, your Query or Analysis Studio reports, those are the ones you're going to want to migrate to the Cognos Workspace Advanced tool, and it is based on 10.2.2. If you work on it right now, that conversion is not something that we recommend. Instead, we recommend you rewrite that subset of reports that you routinely modify so that they are far more modifiable through this interface than they are if you convert them. So that's the story there. One other thing I will show you that is not part of CWA, that is part of Analysis Studio, which you may be using, is this notion of train of thought analysis. And the notion here is pretty straightforward. So in Analysis Studio, I could bring over some data from the model and expand it so that I have some nested stuff here. And let's suppose that I started out by looking at just a couple of interesting order methods on my report. So a custom set. And I drop that up there, and I'll go ahead and look at revenue. So I have a report. And then I say to myself, I wonder what this analysis of fax, mail, and web looks like in the Americas. So I'll go down to my retailers, and I'll grab Americas. Now, if I replace this custom set with Americas, watch what happens in the context filter zone. You see, it actually puts those three order methods that were here into the context filter, keeping my train of thought. So I had a custom set, so I was focused on three order methods, and I said, well, let me look at it by something else that is a custom set. And so it kept to the context as I go. So this is this notion of train of thought. And so now if I wanted to look at, I don't know, a couple of different years, let's suppose, it's going to keep my context as I go. So it's going to keep the fact that it's the Americas and those three order methods, and then show it to me by what I dragged over. So that's train of thought analysis. That is also not part yet, anyway, of Cognos Workspace Advanced. So they are not equivalent tools yet. However, how many people are actually using train of thought? How many people are actually using any other feature or function that's not available? Right, 80% of what both QS and AS do is available in CWA today. So it's definitely worth a look. And then for new projects, like I said, the guidance is use it. But this notion of one size fits all, one studio with a certain set of functionality will work for everyone, is certainly not what IBM is purporting. So one of the things they introduced in Cognos 10.2.2 is something called a custom user interface profile for Cognos Workspace Advanced and for Report Studio. And that's what I'm going to show you now. So this takes us away from one studio fits all to I can create a custom interface for any studio. I'm going to launch the administration portion of Cognos because this is an administrator function. When you install Cognos 10.2.2 and all of the releases before it, one of the things that you get is this collection of two interface profiles. Now, this professional interface profile happens to be the profile that represents the Report Studio interface, and this Express profile happens to be the one that represents the Cognos Workspace Advanced profile interface. You wouldn't necessarily know it by the names, but that's what they represent. You could stick with this approach, but if you want to use this custom profiles, you have to do a one-time and non-revocable action, which is to click this new button that is part of 10.2.2 called Import UI Profiles. Now I'm going to go ahead and click that so I can demonstrate this notion of a custom profile. So you see it's a non-reversible action, and when you do this, it will actually take the user profiles away from the security tab, and it will put them, see they're gone now, here, and they'll put them in the library under user interface profiles, and now it's named them in a way that you haven't got to guess at what they are, which I think is an improvement. The other thing that this tool lets you do is now start with either of these, and I will start with the Workspace Advanced and do a copy. And I will call this I'm going to telegraph the change I'm going to make. So I'm going to do Workspace Advanced with layout calculations. I'm going to add layout calculations to Workspace Advanced. What you'll see if you launch Workspace Advanced natively And you'll note now I'm going to get a prompt as to which interface I wish to use. So I will launch the native interface. One of the things that's in the toolbox is the query calculation tool, but the layout calculation tool, what I would use to create, for example, those text items and the contents of my filters or any parameters, no layout calculation tool. So I want to create a profile that includes that layout calculation tool, and that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm going to edit the profile. And there's an awful lot of things you can turn on and off in this interface. And I have yet to find a great document that explains what every one of them is. So I have found, I've been doing a bit of trial and error. But I know that if I go to my toolboxes and I go to my page view toolbox, you'll see that layout calculation is not checked. I will check it, and I'm going to click OK to save my profile. Now I'm going to launch Cognos Workspace Advanced, and I will go ahead and show you the toolbox after picking that tool. And you'll see that when I go to the toolbox, in the toolbox is the layout calculation tool, which I can add to my report. I won't do that in a particularly fancy way, but here now I can add report functions to my report. I have access now to what I'm used to in Report Studio, for those of you who are Report Studio folks. When I do a layout calculation, that's the tool I use to express anything a user has entered through a prompt, or to put any runtime information on my report, like the date and time that the report was run or saved, or what the name of the report is, and so on. And so now I have that access in Workspace Advanced, whereas before I did not have that access. You can add things, you can also take things away. So I'll start with the standard Cognos Workspace Advanced, and this one I'm going to call Simple. And the notion of simple is I take away some functionality to make it an easier interface to use. So I'm going to just do this brute force so that you can see the changes. So I'm going to get rid of filters and calculations and summaries and sorts and pivoting and sectioning, and just save those. Not proposing you should do that. I just want to show you with a very simple, these things are no longer on the toolbar look. So I could, just like I could add in features from Report Studio that are not part of the standard CWA interface, I can also take away things that are part of the standard CWA interface. See far fewer buttons here than if I launched the CWA native out-of-the-box profile. So let me just do that. So that's the out-of-the-box profile. And if I move this and create a new report, and if I do that and I pick up, so this is my simple interface, and you see I have fewer buttons because I took functionality away from the standard functionality. So you can create custom profiles, and then what you do to say, all right, this group of people get the simple one, you would go in and you'd set properties, and you would assign this profile to the groups that you want to be able to have access to it. If a group has access to one and only one profile, they're not prompted like I'm being prompted when they launch, they just get that profile. If they have more than one profile like I do, they'll get prompted, but you control that using standard security techniques. So the other component of this is you can move these profiles. You can export them and you can import them. Now I exported from another environment a super enhanced version of Cognos Workspace Advanced profile. And so I am going to do an import of that library component and name it. So if you're not familiar with the functionality of import and export, if you're not an admin, it's okay. I'm not going to explain much here anyway, but administrators know that you move data like reports and report outputs, packages, and now user interfaces from one environment to another by exporting from the environment that it's in. It creates a zip file. You copy that zip file to the new environment, and then you import the from the zip file for the new environment. And so let's see if I now have what I think I have. I should have. If I refresh. So there's the imported from my other environment profile. And this profile actually has every feature enabled. And I did that to show you that through this interface, it is actually possible to essentially duplicate all Report Studio functionality within Cognos Workspace Advanced. And so you'll see when this starts up that when I create a new report here, I now have a page explorer. This is CWA, but I have a page explorer. I have a query explorer. When I go into the query, I have a query toolbox. I have query properties. So this UI, this interface, it makes Cognos Workspace Advanced the essential equivalent of Report Studio. And yet, as I build my report, I still can see my data as I go. So I have all the Report Studio features and functions within CWA, and I have preview mode. The only thing that I do not believe you can do yet is to create active reports in this interface. Now, I have been doing a lot of copying of the CWA profile. I can also start with the Report Studio profile and copy it, and then edit that. In that case, I would by and large be removing functionality. So you could imagine creating a number of profiles that perhaps match the user's needs. Maybe the amount of education you've done for a user. I have one organization that has a very simple CWA interface that they will launch to anybody, and they'll just do an hour video of training. If you want to get the next functional level up of profile, then you must attend training. And once you've attended training, they change what group you're in out of the group associated with the simple profile to the group associated with the more advanced profile. So the notion here is that I can now create a custom authoring interface. When a user launches and they do have access to multiples, you might have noticed there is this notion of a default profile. So I could say that I'm going to set that one as my default. And from then on, I should not get prompted for a profile. So even if I do have access to multiples, I can set one as a default. So that is profiles. So it is LPA's position that you should begin considering your migration plans now, especially for those Query Studio, Analysis Studio reports that are ones you routinely modify when you run them rather than just run. For the ones you just run, leave them alone. They will come along for the ride in the next release. You'll be able to run them. You'll be able to use them in Workspace. That will all work. Rewrite, do not convert to Report Studio those reports that you are going to modify, because you will find that they are more modifiable. Once you have converted them into Cognos Workspace Advanced, you could leverage this notion of profiles to give people access to those reports with or without certain features and functions. And you might actually pick the profile for a user group community based on things like need in terms of features and functions they need, or it could be based on education, where you have a profile they'll get with just a little bit of training and maybe a more advanced profile that you'll enable for them when they have a bunch more training. The profiles is available today in 10.2.2, and Query Studio and Analysis Studio remain available for now in 10.2.2. And so with that, I'm going to turn over and take a look at the questions. So the first question that's come in is, when will the next release be out of Cognos BI? Well, that's a very good question. In general, IBM tends to release a new version of Cognos BI in the fourth quarter of the year, right around the time of the Insight conference in Vegas, which is in October. So I know of nothing that tells me that they're not going to do that, but I have also no official guidance that they're committing to a Q4 release of the next release. But if I had to guess, I would say Q4, which is only a couple months away. All right, the next release or question, pardon me, is there a chance that IBM will continue Query Studio and Analysis Studio in the next release? Boy, I don't know. Certainly the guidance was quite direct. This is the last release of that will include Query and Analysis Studio. My suspicion is they won't back off of that, but never say never, right? I suppose it's possible. The next question here. When I use custom profiles and I set a default, I can't unset it. Yes, it took me quite a while to figure that out. So what this person is talking about is when you set that default profile and you're no longer prompted here, how do I set a different I mean, I had access to 3. I picked one as my default. Now I want to change it. What do I do? It turns out it's not a user profile thing. There's no place here in my preferences where it's set that you can go and unset it. It turns out it's stored in a cookie on this PC. So for those of you who are using multiple PCs, it's in a cookie, which means that you'll set a different default by PC, which is, in my mind, a little confusing perhaps. The other thing about that is that if you set it and you change PCs, you might be surprised at what you get. The way to change your default profile is to delete your cookies. And then when you launch again, it will launch and provide you with that option. Whoops. I'm getting the signal that says I'm out of time. I'm so sorry I only had a chance to answer a few questions. Do keep in mind that any questions you've submitted will absolutely be answered after the fact via email. And I think I just have enough time to say thank you so much for your kind attention. I hope this webinar was informative. I look forward to answering the rest of your questions. Thank you very, very much for attending. Have a great day.